The Section 5 inspection regime is well underway, but for those on the front line, there are still a lot of questions. Four determined secondary heads from a cross-section of schools have come to Ofsted HQ to get their questions answered. None of them have yet been inspected under the new regime, and this is their opportunity to examine what inspectors are really looking for. Time to turn the tables on whole school secondary inspector Harmer Parr.
I think there's every incentive, to be honest.
So how honest is honest, really? Because, you know, again, things within a school can change from term to term. You know, we have to go back to doing our SEF on a termly basis. You may have a department, for instance, maybe fragile for a term, there may be maternity leave, sickness, or whatever. Are you completely open about everything that you see as an area of development? Or do you perhaps save some and hope you don't notice them?
I think your question is around whether schools should be playing it tactically in any kind of sense and owning up to things that maybe they would prefer that the inspectors didn't find out. One of the judgments that we have to make is about the quality of your self-evaluation. So if we're finding things out that you don't appear to have noticed, then obviously that's going to reflect on your knowledge of where you are and on your ability to improve things next time round. So I think there's every incentive, to be honest.
You're not really going a bit soft on schools, aren't you? Because, I mean, 2 days, it's going to be really easy for schools to pull the wool over your eyes, and a head who spins it well is going to come out with a good inspection, isn't he?
Well, we don't think so. The new data which we have is more sophisticated and more powerful than the data that we had before. It doesn't tell us all the story, of course, but what it does is it asks some interesting questions.
And will you pick the good out and not just focus on perhaps the things that might have been shoved under the carpet before?
We obviously don't want to see stuff that's sort of stage managed for us, and that's always been the case. And will also be the case in terms of the way the school is inspected. I mean, we wouldn't, as inspectors, for instance, want to be doing things that were disrupting you from the things that you were meant to be doing at the time. If you've got other important things to do, well, then we'll see you when you can be seen, because we want to catch as natural and normal a picture as we can.
Obviously, there's going to be less time spent on lesson observations, but are inspectors prioritising talking to pupils as part of the new arrangements?
There will always be plenty of that going on. So there might, for example, be, you know, seeing a group of pupils with their work, for instance, or there might be opportunities to talk to individual pupils about their experience of some of the school's initiatives. Some of that individual testimony forms some of the most powerful evidence. We're weighing things up at the end of the inspection.
And I suppose as leaders, we're probably guilty, aren't we, of building you up into the enemy, because there's nothing like an external enemy to galvanise a team.
I think you're absolutely right that sometimes, you know, it's Ofsted, so the wagons come round in the circle and, you know, try and make sure that everybody's firing out. By definition, really, it's not going to be such a significant event. I mean, it's obviously going to be a significant event for the school, but it's not going to be, if you like, a curriculum-stopping event, which, you know, I suspect that sometimes it was previously, where, in a sense, everything is put on hold and everything's given a coat of paint, and you're just trying to make sure that things are perfect for that week, because that's precisely what we want to get away from. Which goes back to what I said earlier about...
But the judgments you make are very significant.
Yeah.
Aren't they? So although the week, you know, it may come and go, but those judgments, you know, really stay with the school for a long time. How achievable, how realistic is outstanding?
It's an interesting word, isn't it? And because we now have 4 categories rather than 7, the good category, if you like, is carrying quite a lot of information which would previously have perhaps gone from the spectrum of, you know, sort of top end of satisfactory to bottom end of very, or top end of very good even. But outstanding has always been a separate category. You know, it might well apply to 5%, 10% of schools.
So do you have those sorts of figures in mind?
We don't, no.
Or could every school be outstanding? Or is it relative to the other schools around?
By definition, every school couldn't be outstanding, I guess. And so
it's more measured against other schools that are around then?
No, I mean, it's measured against the criteria. You know, if a school is good, top end of good and sometimes outstanding in all the categories across the report, there's a strong argument for saying that in terms of overall effectiveness, it may well be outstanding.
But would that be a discussion you would have with the school, or would it be something you'd put the stamp on? You'd say, no, we're making this judgment.
The discussion would go on throughout the inspection, really.
So if a school says we're good, but you think actually it's outstanding, would you ever move a judgment up?
That's happened on several occasions, yeah.
Right.
Yes, it's not uncommon. And sometimes that's exactly what the best schools do. And that's precisely why they've become as good as they are, because they're never satisfied with what they're doing. They're always wanting to move on.
But the onus is on the school, isn't it, to provide evidence of its own self-evaluation judgment.
Yes,
That's
it is.
the starting point.
That's the starting point, yeah.
I think the self-evaluation form is clever, isn't it? And I can see that it really pushes monitoring and self-evaluation and inspection, in a sense, onto the senior management team.
But the self-evaluation form is not the story, is it? The key thing is the self-evaluation which the school is doing and which it's doing all of the time. It is about schools doing all of those things for themselves. And our role there is, if you like, to come in as the outsider and provide an objective view of whether we think you're getting it right, whether we think you're taking the right actions to improve.
Do Ofsted see that they've got a role in giving examples to other schools of good self-evaluation forms and good self-evaluation processes?
Somebody said very well, I thought, a few years back that schools have an infuriating habit of getting things right for the wrong reasons. And if things are going very well, and if schools are doing things in a slightly unorthodox way, even if they're self-evaluating in an unorthodox way, it doesn't necessarily matter as long as what they're getting is an accurate picture. Observations of teaching which are done in schools are very often heavily focused on the teaching, but not often focused enough on the learning. And what we tend to do is work the other way round in terms of saying, well, what's the learning like here? And what is it that the teacher's doing that's bringing that about? Sometimes they've been doing it by means of a checklist so that they've ticked off a whole load of boxes about the lesson has clear objectives. But one problem with that approach can be that you've ticked all the boxes, but the pupils weren't actually learning very much. So what we then would find, if that were the case, is that when we then compare our evaluation with the school's evaluation, then ours may well be different for that reason.
National Inspectorate being seen as cosy because head teacher colleagues who have been through the experience describe your approach as forensic. That you are setting up inspection trails that really burrow right down through the middle. I mean, it's not as broad and as wide, but you really go right through the institution. Is there a danger in over-reliance on the PANDA data? I mean, I'm thinking about schools in challenging circumstances where you get high pupil mobility, you get high proportion of refugee and asylum seekers, so you get a lot of unmatched data, which means that there's pupil achievement not reflected in your PANDA information. How open are you to really looking at other performance data analysis?
Totally open is the answer to that. Obviously, we won't take it on trust. We'll check it out. But, I mean, that would actually be part of a school that really knew how well it was doing. Even if it was an early inspection, you would imagine that the school would already have analysed its results for the most recent year, even though they're still sort of unvalidated and so on. In terms of capturing that complexity that you were talking about, the PANDAs capture a surprising amount of that, really, because they're at individual pupil levels, so that you do have comparisons which are based on ethnicity, special educational needs and so on. And you also have an indication of how well those groups are actually performing within the school and whether their performance is typical or if it's particularly good or if it's particularly weak.
I mean, the theme of sort of openness and being open and to new things is coming through very strongly from you. You're obviously wanting to inspire trust in schools, to be open. How are we sure that all Ofsted inspectors will have the same sort of things that you're talking about? How do we know we won't get one that's really, coming with a fixed agenda?
The inspections are obviously quality assured. We identify issues for improvement. In fact, we do all the things that you do.
Testing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I think if you've got this sort of desire to be open and you're building trust, I think it's important that schools know what's done with the data and how fair the system is there. It needs to be a two-way process more at that point.
No, but I think it's if you look at the whole leadership bit, that's our role as head teachers or senior managers to make our staff feel valued. I guess when you're coming in, you're looking very much at the leadership of the school and how you develop your staff.
The leadership is again, like everything else, is evaluated in terms of its impact. What's it actually doing to improve things for the pupils? I suppose there's a parallel there to what we were saying about the lesson observations, that it would be easy to actually focus on what you were doing as leaders without actually focusing on what the outcomes of those things were. So in a sense, it's that need almost to start at the other end and think, well, these are the kind of outcomes that we're getting. What is it that we're doing that's sort of made the contribution to that? I mean, if you take that concept of capacity to improve, which is absolutely key in the inspection system, that capacity would be evident right the way through your school, in the sense that everybody would have a good idea of how well they're doing and how well the pupils are doing. I mean, if it's just the senior leadership team that have got the good idea, and if then inspectors go and talk to middle managers and find that they've got a much less good idea, and then they talk to classroom teachers and find out that they haven't got the foggiest idea, then arguably there's not a lot of capacity in that school, because if the senior leadership team were to change, you couldn't have any sort of guarantee that the place would be able to sustain itself.
I've got 100 support staff in my team who play a vital role in that, and I'd hope that inspectors would find the time to be testing their views out as well, because they've got a huge amount to offer. But I think, hurt feelings about not being seen, I think people should go and get a life and think of something more interesting to do, really.
But I think some subject leaders did enjoy, under the old inspection arrangements, spending time with a subject inspector with whom they could have a very constructive and creative professional dialogue, and that also they came out of the inspection, if they were a successful, high-performing department, with a kind of additional endorsement.
On most inspections, inspectors would want to be testing out the understanding of middle managers about what the school's doing, what their subject is like, the strengths and weaknesses and so on, the sorts of things they've been doing to improve it. I mean, all of that is a key part of management. You can't actually predict exactly the form that the inspection will take, and the middle managers as a group, might actually be seen quite a lot if there's an issue about, how effective that group of people is within the school in terms of, raising standards in subjects.
I mean, I think as far as we're concerned, I think the fear is always going to be there, because as the head teacher, you've got so much of your person is invested in that school and your professionalism. But at the same time, it is a challenge.
We all probably enjoyed being at school, didn't we? We're probably all buffs and prefects
no,
of
thank
head
you.
boys and head girls now. And they always like taking tests, don't they? So I like having a test. I say bring it on.
Oh, right, put his name down.